Ah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Really? I don't know. Do you believe that? You do? Something happened in Sinai? Because you love the community, you love the holidays, you love the truths that are taught by the community. But you don't believe that it came from a mountain in the middle of the desert. Well, whatever that means, that's the question, right? Well, you might as well. Well, because the problem is, if I don't believe that there's an event, because I can't imagine what it means to say God shows up on a mountain. Why not? Well, that's the point. So, why? How can you not understand? That's the question. The question is, if I can't imagine it and it doesn't make sense to me, why do I have to believe it? Because I love the Jewish people. I love the community I'm living in. I love the values of this community. They don't need to come from Mount Sinai for them to be values. What? No, you see the question, no, do they? Do all values come from God? They can't just simply be right? The values that I hold dear? No, not from Jesus. That's the point. It's a humanistic, I can offer a humanistic interpretation of the same thing without having to maintain something as, right? No, I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way. If a person says that, then I appreciate that a lot, but I don't hear it very often. What I do hear, I do hear a lot of people tell me that they love the values of the tradition, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Okay,
They want to become a Jew because they want to affiliate with those values. They want to affiliate with the community
Well,
that
yeah.
celebrates those values.
That's very funny. That's very,
Yeah.
very funny.
Well, that's
I guess
the
there's
point.
value in putting the people to sleep.
No,
Everyone
that's what
needs a little
happens.
Rest every
Hello,
once in a while.
welcome.
Right? Nothing wrong with taking a little nap, I guess.
All right, so hang on. We'll do that in a minute. Now that you raised the question, we have to ask the rabbi his answer. Okay, we'll get to that. Some interesting letters.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad you're here tonight.
And I think the 120 and 7 is not.
Okay.
Well, I think it was 100 when I was born. I think it was another 20 years till the Akhida. In the last 7 years, she lived without them.
Oh, you think so?
That's what I think.
I don't-
Because she left.
That means that the Akedah happened 7 years before Chayei Sarah. I love what you think. I love what you think. How's that? Is that okay?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Is that microphone on? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, we'll do a couple questions and answers, and then we'll get some sleep. You see this thing today? It's amazing. This thing is on. What else is reviewed? I keep. This is such a television show that I keep expecting, dragons to come out.
Right,
And something else is gonna. Another shoe is gonna drop.
Earthquake somehow.
Well, you went to the hospital the other day. Another shoe is gonna drop. He's gonna announce that he's sick and can't run again.
Or that he's going to
all here? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Please come on back in. Let's join a few more minutes of conversation with the rabbi before we conclude tonight, okay? Come on in, come on in, come on in. Happy Thanksgiving. Hooray, hooray, hooray. How much does turkey cost these days? How much is a kosher turkey? How much? How much? Kosher? $2.99 a pound kosher? Good deal.
It's actually better than I thought.
Wow. Seriously.
Because I had to go get one. I had to go get a turkey.
$2.99 a pound.
How much is non-kosher?
29 cents a pound.
Free if you spend $100 on everything else.
Wow. $2.99 a pound. Not bad. That's not bad. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming back. I hope the cookies were good. Everybody good? Everybody fine? Come on in. I want to wish my dad happy birthday tonight.
Happy birthday, Dove.
So he's 127 tonight. No, almost though. Not far. Closer than you think. That's happy birthday, Pop. I hope it's a good birthday for you. First of all, I cherish this opportunity, I have to tell you, because Rabbi Farkas and I spend a great deal of time arguing and talking about institutional matters here at the synagogue. Classes we teach, programs we run, the governance of the shul, raising money. And we spend a great deal of time in boards and committees dealing with these things. And we have, believe it or not, precious little time to talk about these kinds of issues. Precious little time to talk about philosophical issues and theological issues. So the fact that you're all here makes it better. But we would do this anyway. So this is really very fine. So thank you for this opportunity. And thank you for your talk. It was a wonderful talk. And we're going to go back over and pick up some of the issues that you raised in the talk. But before we start, somebody was intrigued by what you said, and they looked at the stained glass window. So if you notice the stained glass window, okay, the stained glass window was created by a pair of artists named Swybach, who created our windows here. You'll notice that in the soil at the bottom are all these random Hebrew letters. You see that? And then out of the Hebrew letters grows this arboretum, and the double helix is on purpose. It is DNA. And it has the names of the Torah portions written on the double helix, right? Going up with the letters. And then it sprouts these pomegranates on the top. And the pomegranates are filled with Hebrew letters also. And you see the circles and stuff. So don't give us the whole hour, but give us a few minutes on just what the letters, what the window means.
Oy. Okay.
No, and you raised it, so you got to tell them. I mean, you can't not tell them.
Okay, so my understanding of this interpretation is that this is both God's garden and the world as we know it, okay? So you've got the mystical understanding that God fashioned the world out of words, out of letters and words. So that's the structure, the soil from which things grow. You have the double helix, which has to do with sort of the soil of human beings, right, is our DNA. The Torah portions then symbolically represent the poetic part of our DNA, the part of us that makes us who we are. The leaves and structures all sort of like reflect this idea that God has created the world through letters. I will say, in this window and in the other windows, if you took all of the fauna together, you'll have the 7 species from Eretz Israel. So you'll have
that's
figs.
Upstairs. That's upstairs on the Shema window.
Right, upstairs. But there's some here. But figs and pomegranates and grapes are here, and there's other ones upstairs. And then if you go towards the center, at the very top, you'll see 2 ladders. You see the 2 ladders up there? Right? One of them, they both represent Jacob's ladder, just in different ways. One of them going up is the 10 Commandments. I don't remember if it's up or down, but you get the picture. And the other one are the 10 what are called sphirot, which are the 10 mystical parts of God in those. And they're considered co-equal over the ark. Get it? So it's both mystical and legal and literary and interpretive. Now, in the middle here, you have two columns. Do you see the two columns? Now, at the top of the columns, from the capitals, you'll see leaves. Does everyone see leaves? Those palm leaves, okay? Everyone see them here? Okay, so they're not just structural columns, they're trees. And there are two trees in the Garden of Eden. They represent the two trees in the Garden of Eden, okay? Now, if you look in the middle here, you'll see what's called the ephod, which is the breastplate from Aaron, and it has the diamonds inside of it. That's the breastplate of the high priest. If you look above that, when the sun is shining in, you'll see crimson and argamon, which are two colored entwined that have to make up parts of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And above that, you'll see bronze and silver, and I think, what's the last one? Iron. Also parts of the Mishkan, specifically the 3 rings. If each parts of those are parts of the Mishkan, as in Parshat Truma. So you'll see those there. And then at the very top, over that, is the menorah. And you look at the menorah, the blossoms of the menorah are almond blossoms. That's how they're described in the Mishkan, in the Torah. But if you look at the center of the menorah, the artist carefully inscribed into it a pattern which represents, again, the mystical pattern of what's called the tree of life, of the Godhead in the mystical world. That's how we know that these represent trees, because that's a tree of life. Okay? And the Shabbat is at the top, because it's the 7 candelabra.
How's that?
Is that good?
Yeah, is that good? Yeah. The double helix is because of the tree of life. So the Torah is itself an arboretum, a tree. It's a tree of life. And then the columns as well. The tradition was that there were 2 great columns in front of the Beit HaMikdash, Yachin and Boaz. And the artist took, there's a bunch of other things in here that are really amazing. And the pomegranate, what's the symbolism of the pomegranate? Because it's also the eternal light is a pomegranate.
Right. It's pomegranate. It's the most mystical fruit that we have. It represents 3 things. Number 1, of all of the 7 species, it's the only one that doesn't give you direct physical sustenance. It's not a fig. It's not an olive where you get olive oil. It's not wheat or barley. It's a fruit. Now, we know in the 20th century that pomegranate juice is very good for you. We can thank our friends the Resnicks for redeveloping pomegranate juice, Palm Wonderful. But the truth is that the rabbis asked, what's the purpose of the pomegranate? And that it was beauty. And beauty. And that the idea is that not everything is meant only for sustenance. Beauty itself is a value. Which is why it also looks like a crown. Because the crown of the world is beauty, and the crown of the world is Torah, and the crown of the world is God. So if you look at a blooming pomegranate when it's in its full fruit, so many seeds inside, just like there are so many mitzvot of the Torah, that these little seeds, which are sweet and delicious and beautiful, represents the mitzvot, which are sweet and delicious and beautiful. So the pomegranate...
There is a... I want to talk about Rabbi Lamb, to begin with Rabbi Lamb.
Sure.
Because he represents something very interesting in the community. I want to understand why it is that people want the Torah to be from outside of human experience. What inside of us does it satisfy to say, of all the books in the world, this one is extra mundane. It comes from outside of our experience. Why do we feel that way? Why do we want it that way?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, I'm asking
I thought
you.
Maybe you. Okay.
No, I'm interrogating you.
Okay.
So.
Great. Think about it this way. When you were younger, and let's say you had a wonderful relationship with your parents, at some point you thought that your parents were Superman or Superwoman. Right? At some point that relationship changed, but at the very least you believe that your parents were extra mundane. Because they gave you...
Extra mundane means outside of the world, outside of our normal experience, okay?
That they came from somewhere else, you inherited this world in which you lived, and this was your guide to the world. And these weren't just any guide, it was the absolute best guide. There was no man in the world like your father, and there was no woman in the world like your mother. Having that kind of relationship, if you're fortunate enough to have that kind of loving relationship with a parent, gives you orientation and direction. And so when your father says, do your homework, you're going to do your homework because the extra mendacity, if you will, of your father's experience, of your father's life over you, gives you that surety and that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So the Torah, in that way, cannot be like anyone else. It has to be special. It has to be special because it's full of keys for life. It's full of directions, mitzvot, for life. And so it has to be special because if it wasn't special, it would just be like everyone else's parents. And maybe not worth following.
So we had this belief that God handed truth. God handed truth to us. God handed us laws and rules. And then modernity came along, and it offered us an interesting opportunity to be liberated from that. To say, well, not really. You say we have democracy, for example. I mean, the whole notion of democracy is that no king can rule over you because the government governs by the consent of the governed. So modernity freed us from the oppression of a God-given law and gave us the opportunity to choose the laws, choose our own values, choose our own rules and laws. But the disadvantage of living in that circumstance is then you live in a circumstance of ultimate relativism, which means no rules are absolutely right. No laws are absolutely righteous. No truth is absolutely correct. What's correct in one generation ends up being incorrect in another generation. The things that we thought we knew, the rules that we thought were the right rules get changed a generation later. So there is this need, there seems to be this need within those of us who have been raised in this modern milieu to escape from the relativism by holding on to something and saying, but this is going to be, this is special, this is not the same.
Don't you feel that's true today? Don't you feel that acutely today?
Some days.
Last week we had a shooting in Santa Clarita.
Right.
A couple of kids lost their lives.
Horrible,
right?
yeah.
We had fires. You had hurricanes. We have immense, intense political disagreement and upheaval in this country. You look out at the world, from inside this building, you can look out at the world and say the world is tohu vavohu. It is chaos.
Absolute chaos.
Right?
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I want to come in here, open this gate behind us, and pull out a Torah and say, no matter how terrible the world is out there, this is the thing I can hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that feels very human to me. And if that means that I have to elevate the Torah somehow beyond the mendacity of life, because the mendacity of life feels like a muck, then at least I have this one thing. So I think it feels very human to do that.
But then what happens is, if you go down the sheet that you gave us, right? Each of these thinkers then introduces a little more sort of human element
That's
to
right.
this, right?
Exactly.
Fackenheim says, okay, so God did give us the Torah, but the Torah that we have is not the Torah that God gave. It's the Torah that, well, first of all, what Moses heard, but more than that, it's what we interpret it to be. And then Boxer says, well, it's not the Torah that God gave, it's the Torah that we sort of put together. It's the partnership. And then you get to Schulweis, who says, God gave is not a language I understand at all. The Torah is what we as a people have discovered over our generations to be true, but it's really a generational historical process. So by adding all of that human element back in, don't you introduce all this relativism, which makes the whole thing kind of wiggly all over again?
Absolutely, and I think we're experiencing that. Let me throw one more out at you. What if you were to understand your relationship to the Torah like your relationship to a boomerang? A boomerang.
A boomerang.
You know what a boomerang is? Piece of wood built kind of like this.
Australian weapon that you throw and it comes back to you?
Right. So what if we all concede that, yeah, okay, maybe the Torah was written by a bunch of folks, probably men, over the course of a period of time. And we throw that out into the universe. And then we say, I'm already knowing that, but I'm going to suspend my disbelief. I don't have to believe, but I'm going to suspend my disbelief. And then it comes swirling back to you as if you never threw it in the first place. How do you respond to it then? That is to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. The relativism, the wiggliness is all there. But I'm going to buy in because I want to buy in. And when I buy into something, that means I'm going to buy in. Not on conditions, not with preconceived notions, not with presuppositions. I'm going to buy in. And that means when it comes back to me, it's as if it was presented to me anew in a way that feels like it's coming from somewhere else.
Does that satisfy you? I mean, does that satisfy the need for an objective truth, for an extra mundane truth? Or do you always remember that it's a boomerang, and that you sent it out yourself?
Let me ask you this question. When you sit in a movie that enraptures you, and no one's on their phone during the movie, let's just say are you looking at the exit to the theater?
I've been to some movies where I've looked at the exit. That's true.
I mean a good movie.
Okay.
Pick your favorite movie.
Yeah, but there's a difference. If the movie enraptures me, it's true. But I don't gain my life wisdom. I don't go out and I don't take The Godfather or Star Wars and say I'm going to build my moral code on the basis of that.
It's true.
If you did, it would be an interesting moral code.
And I would say if you're willing to do that for Luke Skywalker,
right,
why are you not willing to do that for Moshe Rabbeinu?
Well, I'm willing to enjoy the narratives in the way that I enjoy a movie, but I'm not willing to build a moral code on the basis of that, because I know that because I can't deny the fact that I'm suspending disbelief.
So let's put it this way. Let's say it's heteronormative.
Anyone understand the question? You see what we're trying to do here? Okay. Yeah. No. You say no, Harvey? I'm sorry. Somebody said no. Jay said no. I'm sorry. I apologize. Jay said no. All right. So the question. So the rabbi's asking the following question. I'm a modern person. Okay. I know how things get made in the world. I know archaeology, paleontology, social psychology. I'm not willing to believe initially in a God who hands down a book to me. Because I know that every ancient mythology has the same story. I know mythologies, right? So when I first encounter the Torah, my first response is as a modern person who says, this is a product of history, a product of culture. It's not in any way different than any other product of culture, okay? But then what I do is I say to myself, but I want to look at it differently. So suppose I come back to it a second time and I say, I'm going to suspend my disbelief. That process of suspending disbelief is a process we go through all the time. We do this all the time. When you go to a play and you watch a play and you become engrossed in the play, you know that the actors with some part of your brain, you know that the actors on the stage are not Romeo and Juliet. I'll give away the ending. You know that at the end of the play, they're not really dying, and yet you feel the emotions watching it happen. You suspend disbelief, okay? We do this all the time. When we go to a ball game, and I don't know how many sports fans, but you go to a ball game and you cheer for your team, and you believe that your team is out there fighting as one, in a certain sense, for you. But really, the fact is, you know that they're not. I mean, they're just guys playing a game. So the question is, can I reappropriate Torah with the same sense of play, where I suspend disbelief and reappropriate it and make it mine, and regain a sense of the enchantment of the Torah? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what the rabbi suggested.
That's the question. Now, I will say, I'll add two more things to this. When you watch a ball game, what's the number one thing besides winning that's important in any ball game?
The hot dogs.
That each team plays by the rules. Otherwise, the game's not the game, right? The number one rule in any ball game is don't break the rules. Okay? It's second rule again, fine, whatever. But you understand, which means that we are taking the moral code that is within us already and projecting it onto the game. We want fairness. We want competitiveness. We want rule following. We do want victory. We want moments of tension and release. That's right. You need rabbis and cantors to lead you through the shul too. And when you're watching a movie, let's take Romeo and Juliet. Why is Romeo and Juliet so full of pathos? Because the human experiences pathos, and we're projecting our pathos onto these actors and seeing it reflected back to us through their acting. So there is already something from within us that pushes it outwards. That's pushing that experience outward, and it comes back to us, reflected to us. So when we see, I forgot who dies first. When one of them dies, and the other one actually thinks that that person is dead, or remember, I think it's whatever it is, right? And we see the tragedy of the whole thing just unrolling, and it looks like a train wreck happening, and you can't stop it, and then she dies, and then the camera, so to speak, pans out, and you're like, wow, what just happened? What do I learn about life in that moment? You have life, you learn things in tragedies. You learn things in victories. You learn things in sweetness, in play, in story. So I don't think I would elevate that more rather than taking it down, the whole human experience down. And so this is our story. So we haven't talked about the fact that we own it. That's ours. It comes from us. Mm-hmm. But if I'm willing to suspend my disbelief such that when it comes back to me, I learn its lessons anew. I am enchanted. I'm enchanted with the pathos. I'm enchanted with the wonder. I'm enchanted with sublimity. Because that's what the Torah ultimately is teaching me. I am enchanted with the values that Rabbi Shoyes was saying about justice and peace and compassion and freedom. And I'm willing to set my life by that clock because that clock is so meaningful to me. It's all of that with an escape hatch. When it really just doesn't work, okay, so then I can walk out for a little bit. But I'm going to walk back in. Because life is more meaningful in Technicolor than it is in black and white.
Yeah, it's interesting that, by the way, so Schulweis, Rabbi Schulweis, who is, eminently modern in the way that he thinks about things.
That's right.
So eminently modern means he rejects any idea of supernatural. Because science, the basic premise of science, is that nature is in all places in all ways. There's no such thing as outside of nature. So Rabbi Shoyes begins, and he learned that from his teacher Mordechai Kaplan. But he actually held that even before he met Mordechai Kaplan. I mean, this is his mentality. Okay? So he's trying to think about how do you understand Torah if you don't accept anything outside of normal experience. You see, if you want to read Rabbi Lamb or even Rabbi Fackenheim here, Professor Fackenheim, you've got to say that something happened on Mount Sinai which is utterly unique in human history and has never happened to you or me. And there's this event on Mount Sinai where God enters the world, right? But for Rabbi Shoyes, he learns from science that there's no such thing as events that happen, unique, and there's no such thing as events that we haven't. The only events I know are the ones that happen to all of us. So what he's asking is, in the course of our normal experience, can we establish some sense of the authority of Torah? And what he says is, yeah, you have a self-conscious community of Jews who have lived together for 5,000 years, or 3,500 years, and in the course of our living together, arrive at certain understandings of what makes human life worth living. And we call that Torah. So for Shoyes, he offers this interpretation, which is a terrifically compelling interpretation for people who say, I can't believe in a God who's outside nature giving us instructions. The problem is that every time he taught it, every time he taught that idea, people would say, what do you mean God didn't give the Torah? Like, nobody was satisfied with that interpretation except Rabbi Shoyes. Everybody wants some sense in which Torah is more than my normal experience. That this notion that the rabbi is discussing with us about enchantment, about something that's more than the normal experience. So it's very interesting that he championed this idea, and he, did it as articulately and as passionately as one can do it, and he lived it. I mean, Rabbi Shoes really lived this idea.
right.
But even so, every time he tried to teach it, he got shouted out. People just say, "What?" Right? How can you, where's God? I mean, I want something more than just my own experiences. So that's where this argument ends up. You see, on the one hand, we want something more than our own experiences. On the other hand, we're modern people, and we're very skeptical. Look, what's the truth? The truth is that if a guy stands on the corner of Ventura and Sepulveda and says, "God spoke to me," you don't call him a prophet, you call him an ambulance.
Exactly.
Right? You don't listen to his words and write them down in a holy book. You give him you give him a shot of Haldol, and you put him at Olive View for a month, and he'll get over it, right? Because we have a hard time believing that. But we still want some enchantment in our religious life, and that was one of the reasons why Rabbi Shoes found such frustration when he tried to teach these ideas.
Can I add one thing on the other side of the coin, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's all true, and
Thank you.
we might, you're welcome. We might also feel that enchantment is child's play. Or even if it's not child's play, it's art, it's inspiration, but it's not the real grittiness of, grinding through life. What's the alternative vision of reality? What's a reality where this is no more important than a Time magazine article? In that world, if we don't hold anything, if we're not enchanted by a single thing, if we look at the world and all we see is mud, then the only thing that matters is who has power. Not what the values are, but who holds the power. And then we'll be in an unending battle for power. And there's no reason, and then Nietzsche is right, that the only ethics that exist are either the ethics of power or those who don't have power trying to fake their way into getting power. And if that's really the world we live in, what's the version of the world you want to live in? Would you rather live in a world where some of your dreams can come true, where all of your dreams can come true, or where absolutely none of your dreams can come true? Which version of enchantment are we actually talking about? I'd rather be enchanted with the Torah because it gives me moral direction than be enchanted with my own humanity, which leaves me stuck in the mud.
All right, let's stop here. We can do this.
I can do this all night.
For a while, yeah. And get some comments and questions. I hope this was clear. Louise has the microphone, and we use the microphone so that our friends at home can join us. There we go. Thanks so much.
So
Yes.
Rabbi Farkas, you talk about chaos in the world.
Yep.
Much of it is caused by us. It sounds like you're saying Torah should be a haven of refuge. I disagree with that strongly. I think that Torah, to me, I was using an analogy when we were having our break. To me, Torah is a navigation system. It's a GPS.
Yeah.
And it works very well with the whole idea of free choice.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. Free choice is very scary.
Yeah.
It's very scary. If you believe that things are predetermined, life is much easier. If you're a fatalist, much easier. So I disagree with you strongly. I don't want a Torah to be a place I go to as a haven of refuge from my reality. I don't want to do that. Anyway, that's just my point.
Want to answer?
Director, you want to? Yes, so she was saying that what I was saying earlier about Torah being a refuge from the chaos of the world, that she disagrees strongly with that Torah brings you into the world, not out of the world, essentially, if I may say so. And I agree with you. I wasn't saying that was my position. That was the position of Norman Lamb. I would say that my position is that I do believe that Torah is a bulwark against chaos, but not because we're trying to run away from it, but we're trying to create order out of it. And it is a way that we do that. I mean, the most important sentence of the Torah is Bereshit bara Elohim. It's when God created the world. Because God's decision in the Torah was to look at chaos and to begin to tear the chaos apart and to create order in the universe, which exists in a structural order, ontological order, and most importantly, a moral order. And that's what I think the future of religion is not about is not about holding a nation together as much as it is holding the chaos at bay by creating the world in which the chaos can't seep in.
Good, thank you. You got to talk really loud. Norm,
Sorry, you
because
got into the mic.
yeah, that mic's not great, but we'll hear you.
Is the only two alternatives you have mud on the one hand and God on the other? Is that the only way?
I'll repeat the question.
White world?
The question is there only two versions of reality, this dreamscape of the Torah and muck? Right? And of course that's not true. I mean, what's true, there's an entire spectrum of reality. But the truth is that, to me, is that if you had to choose between looking down at your shoelaces and saying this is all that there is in the world, or looking up at the heavens and saying there's something more, then it seems like there's a possibility of a choice. And I think in a world today that is incredibly violent, that where the postmodernity, this sense of just deconstructed, torn apart reality has seeped into every corner of society, where relativism and what's good for you and what's good for me might not be the same, and we can live in that society together, and then we'll just fight about it all the time. That society has not shown us that there's anything particularly wonderful about it. And so why not, in a pluralistic society that's utterly pluralistic, set forth our norms, our path, our guidebook, our GPS, and say that this is our version of the world. And I'm going to live by this, and I'm going to buy into this, and I'm going to let it guide my life with a little escape hatch on the side. But I'm going to let it guide my life, because that's a better choice of living a more directive, purposeful, and meaningful existence. That's what I'm trying to say.
Does that make sense? You're making a face, Norm. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't think it's the only way. It's our way, Norm. And in a pluralistic world, I can either allow myself to be subsumed into the plurality of the thing, or I can also take the thing that feels indigenous to me and say that's the thing I want in the world. That's my version. I want Jews to be proud to be Jewish. I want Jews to be proud of our heritage. I want Jews to look at our Torah and say this is our version of meaning in the world. If it's not yours and it's not for you, but you do find that you have meaning and purpose in the world through another system,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's great.
Yeah.
I welcome you into our space. This is mine and that is yours. If you want to be a part of our system, that's great. I'll make you a Jew tomorrow. But this is our system. Rather than saying our system is bad and we should throw it out and we should go after someone else, let's be proud of what we have.
I'll give you an interesting case study. If you haven't, just take a second, okay? I do a seminar with a high school, with one of the Jewish high schools here, with their junior class, their 11th graders, about relationships. They have a retreat every year, and they talk about sexuality and relationships and things that are important to kids. And as I was preparing for this thing, I described to the kids that I'd once been to an engagement party in a very, very ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in Israel, where two kids were getting engaged. And I watched this. You know, here's a boy who's been raised his whole life in the yeshiva world with only boys, and a girl who'd been raised only with girls, and they were meeting for the first time, and they were going to be married a month later. And I said to the kids, think about that for a second. These are two human beings who live in a highly structured society where there are rules on top of rules on top of rules given by God. And that's their lives. And how many of you would like to live in that world? Like, not one kid. Why not? There's no freedom, no expression, no individuality. And then I said to the kids, and how much better is your world? I said to these kids, I think that you guys live in a world which is just as challenging, because where those kids have rules to govern their relationships and their lives, you have no rules. especially when it comes to, things sexual, right? There are no rules. I was raised in a generation that wanted to break out of all the rules. My generation, the boomer generation, we broke all the rules, right? We got the pill in 1961, and we started having sex with everybody. And the idea that sex should be reserved for marriage was thrown away, and everyone's living with everyone and sleeping with everyone, and Playboy magazine became passé because there's pornography every place, and I said to these kids, you have no rules that govern your sexual life. And the kids said, that's true. And I said, how does that feel? And they said, it's terrifying. Because what's right and what's wrong? What's right and what's wrong? You know, does a girl or a boy have a right to say to a partner, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have this kind of relationship. So I said to the kids, let's start building an ethic. And we started with the Torah. And I said, okay, let me give you a line from the Torah. God created the human being in the divine image. What does that mean? And we took from that, this notion of Tselem Elokim, the image of God, the ultimate infinite preciousness of every human being, and started working and built an ethic out of it. It's a very interesting experience. So here's the sort of process that we've been talking about. You had a traditional society with very heavy rules, a modern revolution which broke all the rules, and a postmodern world in which there are no rules and life can't be lived. And now you have a postmodern world where a bunch of kids say, give us back some rules because we can't live without rules. And let's take a principle from Torah and build the rules on the basis of that. It's a very interesting process with these kids. Very, very interesting conversation with these kids. That's just as a way of illustrating what the rabbi said. Who has the microphone? Brian.
What if we define God as the religious interpretation of a collective experience? Okay, that's how we define God.
Well, that's where you would find God, not how you define God. But go ahead.
If we did define God that way, wouldn't that kind of bridge the gap between Schulweis and some of these other people?
There's lots of ways to bridge the gap. It's a wonderful question. There's lots of ways to bridge the gap. I had a teacher when I was in seminary. I had an internship with a very unique teacher, a man named Alan Miller, of blessed memory. Alan was raised in an Orthodox home. His father's an Orthodox rabbi in London. Alan has a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of London, and he's a fully qualified psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, right? And when we would study together, he said to me, look, my father believed that the Torah is the product of the infinite mind of God. And I believe that the Torah is the product of the infinite mind of man. Who's to say that at that point of infinity, man and God don't meet? And that's what revelation really is, right? Rabbi Schulweis was a very religious man. He didn't believe in a God out there. He believed in a God within. And that Torah is the product of the God within, which means that there is a quality of transcendence within the human being that is expressed in our behavior and expressed in our moral aspirations, expressed in our dreams for a better world for our family, for our kids, and that's the God that he meets. And if you start playing with those ideas, you end up in a place where many of these seem to come back together again. Many of these come back together again, okay? Thank you. Please, sir.
I wish I had the talent that you expressed yourself.
Me too. I wish you had the talent that I expressed. Oh.
About 30 years ago,
Yeah.
as an atheist, I started to read the Bible for the first time.
Okay.
I fell in love with it. But when I was reading, I realized that everybody was in chaos. Whatever, it was for the first time that I learned the meaning of living God. On that time,
Yeah.
I thought that we Jews believed that God lived with us in our mind, not physically. But when I read the Bible in the language that you could understand, and I explained it to my siblings or whatever, everybody was said that I was blasphemy. They didn't understand me. They would call me Jesus, Moses freak.
Yeah,
They called me that.
a Moses freak,
Yes, Moses.
as opposed to a Jesus freak. That's not so bad being a Moses freak. I think I'd call myself that too.
After 30-some years,
Yeah,
I have evolved in many ways.
Yeah.
And I think I cannot define God because God changes within my mind
right.
during the voyage that I am in.
Good.
In many situations, the parameter or the attributes
Okay.
of God changes.
Right.
I think if you want to know God, you need to know His creation.
Okay, so let's just take one piece of that, because I think that's a very beautiful autobiographical comment. The rabbi spoke about the Romans who entered the Holy of Holies of the ancient temple and were surprised to find it an empty room, right? The equivalent of that, and he asked us the question, what kind of culture builds a temple around an empty room, right? So the equivalent of that is the following. God has a name in the Bible, but you can't pronounce it. And we don't pronounce it. We say Adonai, which is a placeholder. Now, what does it mean to worship a God who you can't see and you can't even say his name? I mean, the idea that his name is unpronounceable tells you that this is not something you're going to define, right? Once you give it a name, you've defined it. You've put it in a box, right? But you don't put God in a box, because the very nature of divinity, the very godhood of God, is that it breaks out of all boxes. It's beyond all boxes. It's the very principle, if you follow this idea before of transcendence, transcendence means it's the breaking of boxes itself, right? How does Abraham find God? Smashes idols. The first Jew is an idol smasher. And we've been smashing idols ever since. And anytime someone says, oh, I know what God is, he's worshiping an idol. Because you can't put it in a box. That's the problem. You're on the right track. You're on the right track. And the fact is that you can't define it. That's exactly the principle. That's exactly the principle of the first commandment, right? You'll have no images of me. Now, the great interpretation of that is not the second commandment. Abraham Joshua Heschel once made this observation that God himself breaks that commandment because he creates something in his own image. He creates human beings, which means that the only material out of which you can create an image of God is the full life of a human being. That's the only image of God that you're allowed to make in the world. But that has to be a constantly growing, you have to be transcending and growing all the time. And so I think your observation is a beautiful one. And I congratulate you on your journey.
Very nice.
Who has the mic? Hi.
I do. Okay, so I really appreciated the discussion tonight.
Thank you.
It kind of reminded me of that whole continuum of, that interaction between internal and external, and sort of the idea of how much power, if you will, if that's one way of thinking of it, that you're giving to something that is outside of yourself as opposed to what is inside of yourself. And I've had lots of discussions with I was raised ultra-Orthodox and with a very much I have a personal God inside of me that just came with mother's milk.
Good.
So I've had lots of conversations with people who are seeking something. And it kind of reminds me of the analogies, the empty room, which reminded me of the Wizard of Oz, which reminds me that sometimes we're talking about something that creates a tension for people about, well, there's something there and I'm not getting it. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
that
right.
kind of thing. And also, another observation would be the fact that as individuals, we have varying needs for having stuff spelled out for us or giving power to others. And some of us have more of a need of being the creative source of our own fascinations or
Yeah.
passions.
Yeah.
So I think all of these things are interplays to what we're talking about here. But I just wonder if you have any comments about.
Oh, got lots, yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to do something?
Can we let's return to the metaphor. Well, let's start with Wizard of Oz, right? The whole point of Wizard of Oz is this big moment, and you're like, oh, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? And the whole fireworks and laser show gets torn down, and you just see some snake oil dealer from Kansas who got lost in a tornado, right? Okay. Now think about your parents for a minute. There does come a point in the life of every teenager, if not sooner, that your mom and dad cease to be Superman and Superwoman. In fact, you become the villain. You individuate, right? And that your parents just become just like everyone else. That show up late, can't get their work done, let you down, whatever it is. And if you could make it through that process as an adolescent, and God willing you have a good relationship, you return to your children or you return to your parents, not in the same form that it was before, but with a different kind of relationship. Because at some point, as we know, some of us have to take care of our parents. And so the breaking down of that moment, where it feels like this magisterium that was out there is taken down. The Romans go in and find an empty room. The Russians find nothing outside of the atmosphere. So there's a lot of what's called frisson, a lot of emotional release in that moment. Okay. But then can't you come back to that relationship and say, I know that the room is empty, but I'm going to live as if it is not. I know that my parents aren't perfect, but I'm still going to call my mom on Mother's Day. I know that my dad's not perfect, and leaving abusive relationships aside for a minute. My dad isn't perfect, but he's my dad. I know my friends aren't perfect. I know my wife isn't perfect, but I still love you anyway. It's this aftermath, this postmodern aftermath that we live in. I need rules, and I'm willing to concede that I'm the creator, or someone is the creator of those rules, God or not God. But when I'm willing to do that, I'm willing to then live in that world because it's worthwhile. With an escape hatch, when those rules are really unjust because they're an archaic vestige of a bygone era, then let's change them. That's okay, let's change them. But I'm going to live in the rules. And I'm going to play the game as if the rules came from somewhere else. So there's part of me that's creating this reality and part of me that's receiving this reality. And where they meet is where things get interesting, and it's the exceptions and all of that. But I'm willing to live in that cycle because that's a cycle that gives me meaning and purpose. So I don't know if I was all clear in what I said, but I think the response to you is that we're living in this aftermath. I'm not afraid of the temple coming down because it already came down. I'm interested in building what's left from what's left.
I would just, it's beautiful, thank you. I just want to correct the metaphor because I think
Please.
that you have it a little bit wrong.
Okay?
The Romans run into that room and they tear apart the curtain. What they're expecting to see is a dragon or a goblin or a ghost or a warrior god like they worship. Because we see what we're expecting to see. And these were warriors, and they expected to see a god with a sword in his hand ready to kill them. And when they didn't see that, they said, oh, the room is empty. Because they didn't see what was in the room. The room wasn't empty. The room was filled with the hopes and dreams of the Jewish people. The room was filled with the ideals and the values of the Jewish people. The room was filled with the history and the heritage of the Jewish people. The room was filled to the brim. But they weren't ready to see what was in that room because they were ready to see the projection of their own rage and aggression and conquering spirit. They weren't ready to see what we see in that room. That room was filled for us. It was empty for them because they didn't see it. Right? So that's the difference. So the question is, can I go back in the room, take a peek, and say, oh, now I see it. Now I see all the things in the room. The room was filled to the brim. Jay, you get the last question because Ben and Jerry's is closing in 10 minutes, and I'm not going to miss it. Go ahead. Whether you believe in God or not, believe in his prophets, Ben and Jerry. Go ahead. Menchies, right? Go ahead.
Be a mensch, right?
I listened to your discussion of what seems to be the evolution of the idea of God from Rabbi Lamb out to Morenu, Rabbi Schulweis.
Well, it's actually evolution because they're all at the same time. They're contemporaneous.
Right, but I mean the direction of the thought.
Sure.
Okay, until you end up, if I heard you correctly, with a God, according to Rabbi Schulweis, that's on the inside of you.
We should have done it opposite. That would have been better. We should have started with Schulweis and ended with Lamb.
Maybe.
And
but, I mean, the idea that God is specifically inside of us feels sort of idolatrous to me. Right? That I feel as if we're going to believe in a God, the God has to be somewhere outside. And I started to read a book. It's a way thick book, and I've only gone a very short way, and it has a great title. It says Confessions of a Born-Again Pagan. It's written by a man named Anthony Kronman. And he has a sort of, I think he doesn't want to use the word deistic. He's looking at God as sort of the totality of the world.
Sure.
And I guess if I have a question, the question is, what would you say to Professor Kronman? Because I started to read it, and he says it goes away from any Abrahamic type God conception and goes towards Aristotle. And I'm thinking, I'm reading Isaiah, and I like his God, but I don't feel like I'm a pagan.
You're not so the first thing I'd recommend is read Rabbi Schulweis's book, For Those Who Can't Believe.
Right.
And if I can offer you a shameless plug, in February, my book on Rabbi Schulweis, I've written a biography of Rabbi Schulweis. It's called In Pursuit of Godliness, and it'll be out in February, and it'll soon be a movie near you. Right? So Richard Dreyfuss plays me, and Eli Wallach plays Rabbi Schulweis, and
We should do that once. We
Glenn-
should film
Glenn
VBS
Close-
the movie and
Glenn
decide
Close plays
which
my
famous
wife.
actors gets to
But
play
but
all
here's
of us.
the point is this: if you see yourself as you are, and say that's God, that's idolatrous.
Yeah.
That's also arrogant.
Exactly.
But if you say that there's something inside of me, as we talked a moment ago, a transcendent principle which is pushing me to be a better Jay, a better human. His name is Jay. A better human being, a more gentle, a more kind human being, along the directions that the Jewish people have defined as the values that make up Menschlichkeit. And that's what rules you. Rabbi Schulweis called that conscience. It's the power that pushes you to be more than you are, beyond the limits of your interests and your appetites, moving to what you could be. That's an expression of divinity. That's an expression of divinity. It's a long lecture, but one of the beautiful things that Rabbi Schulweis, of course, did was he discovered in 1963 Christian rescuers during the Holocaust, which was deeply rooted in his own theology. Because the idea was there was no earthly reason why these people should have done what they did. No rational person would have risked what they risked to save strangers of another faith and another background. So I said, why on earth do people do this sort of stuff? And the more rescuers he met, the more he realized that his intuition was not wrong, that there is something inside of us which pushes us to be more than we are. And that's the God that he worshipped. That's the God he worshipped. That's not arrogant. That's not idolatry. That's a certain quality of divinity. Okay? Thank you all very much tonight. Thank you to
Thank you for
Rabbi
coming.
Farkas for his splendid teaching. Next week, have a really, really lovely Thanksgiving. If you need recipe help with your turkey, call Rabbi Farkas. He's an expert. The following week, December the 4th, Professor Gail Leibowitz is going to open up the Talmud for us, and we're all going to enjoy the debate of the Talmudic rabbis. So please come back and enjoy that with us. Take good care. Thank you. Next Wednesday? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's just Erev Thanksgiving. Is there lunch and learn next Wednesday? Yeah. No, lunch and learn was today.
Yeah, lunch and learn was today, Dave.
Today, you missed it today. It's not next week. It was today. Have it tomorrow. Thank you.